Alright, YouTube, I'm back to talk about simple pawn endings. As you can see right here, white has an advantage of one pawn. Now in the opening of the game or the middle of the game, that might not be a very big deal, but here it's going to be completely decisive. Unfortunately though, a lot of amateur players and beginners, and even some relatively experienced players, have no idea how to win this. The most common mistake we see is that white will immediately push the pawn forward. And this will lead to a draw because black will be able to get something called opposition. And we'll talk about what that is in a moment. But before we go any further, I'm going to demonstrate the proper way to do it, to win this game. You begin by using your king, either king to d2 or king to f2, it doesn't matter. And black will probably come up to greet you. King d3, king e6. Now white has the opportunity to take the opposition by stepping to the square e4. White king is right in front of the black king and gains opposition. If black king steps this way, we can undercut to the d5 square. Notice how the white king is now controlling more squares along the line that the pawn's going to go up. Okay? In this position with the king on e4 and the king on e6, white only controlled maybe these three squares where the pawn could go to. But after he got opposition and undercut the black king, he now controls a few more. Okay? So opposition is when you're standing right in front of your opponent's king and it's their turn. Okay, now let's say black goes straight back. Well, that's great. We just follow him and now we gain opposition even further up the board. He goes to d7, f6, undercutting the king. So let's say he goes back to d6. Now the black king is threatening to come to d5 and then into e4. Play the pawn up to e4. Notice how the white king does a great job of helping escort and usher the pawn down to the queening square. King d7, e6, black goes back to e8, but it doesn't matter now. White can use the opposition again to control the queening square. King d6, if black goes to f8, king comes to d7 and then controls the queening square and you can push the pawn. And if the king comes to d8, you can just go to f7 and then proceed to promote the pawn. Now, for those more experienced players, it's very easy to understand, but some of you might be asking, well, why does it matter if I push the king first or if I push the pawn first? Well, let me show you what happens if you make the mistake of pushing the pawn first. e4, king e2, king e7 rather, and now if e5, the king will come to e6 and capture the pawn. So let's say the king goes to e2. Black plays king e6, white plays king e3, and now king to e5, and black has the opposition, okay? So white's king has to choose which way to go. Say d3. Black king can just kind of wait around back here. Straight back. White king comes up, gains opposition. Now this might look a little confusing because it looks like white is making progress, but let's see where this goes and what happens when we get down to the edge of the board. White checks, king goes under, the white king waits. Now it looks like black's getting forced backward. That's what we want, right? But watch out. King goes back, king goes up, waits around, push, king goes back there. This is a very important move. I'm going to talk about why in a second. The king to d8 would lose the game because it allows white to get opposition by coming to the d6 square. If c8, e7 will queen. If e8, e7, king f7, king d7, pawn queens. But if we go to e8, the game will be drawn. Now, let's say the king goes up to d6. We play king to d8. Okay? Now white either has to go backward or push the pawn. If it goes to the side, the king comes here, and we're going to end up in the same position. Let's say we push the white pawn. Check. King e8. White has two choices, both of which will lead to a draw. He can either step away from the pawn to one of these 3 squares. Or he can go here, and black is now stalemated. It's not in check. It's not, can't move out of check. So black is getting exactly what he wants there. The problem white has is that the pawn he pushed too quickly actually ends up getting in his way. And now I'm going to talk about an advanced concept called triangulation. Normally, when you are fighting for opposition, a king will be able to, I'm going to put these in the middle of the board, you go here, you're right in front. But there are times where you actually want to take 2 moves to get to a square that you could get to in 1. And here's an example. A lot of the time in blitz games, people moving really fast will try to trick each other into giving away the opposition here. White will play here, black will get opposition, and then white will go back like this, hoping that maybe black will make a mistake. For example, like this is a typical black mistake. King here, and now the proper move is to come up this way. But if they make a big mistake and they go to right here, who's got the opposition now? But in this position, the white pawn prevents the white king from being able to triangulate and get the opposition. Black's king is free to triangulate and keep the opposition and thus draw the game. I know it's a little complicated, but stick with me here. Watch how it works. In this position, black has 3 different moves. One of them draws, one of them loses. Okay, 2 of them lose. King to d8 will lose because it allows the white king to come to d6 and gain opposition. King f8 loses because it allows the king to come to f6 and gain opposition. But king to e7 holds the white king back, gaining opposition. White plays king to d5 or king to f4. Obviously going back will lose the pawn. King to d5. Now, black wants to get to the d8 square in 2 moves. Okay, if he goes back to d8 now, the white king comes to d6, and it's some win for white. But the king goes to e8. Now here's where you see the triangulation. Okay, you're going to make a little triangle there. Looks like a little triangle. The king goes here, and now the black king can step to d8, gain opposition, and white is back with that dilemma. He's got to push the pawn up and end up stalemating or giving away the pawn, or he has to go back. So he goes back here. When white retreats, you have to go to e7. Okay, if he goes back to d, e7. Here. Uh-oh, looks like white's got opposition. But because black can triangulate, he's okay. Straight back. If white decides to penetrate on either side, we gain opposition. If white decides not to penetrate, by going here or here, we come back. Hopefully you understand this concept. That's why you have to leave the pawn back. Now let's change the scenario a bit. Let's say you're right here, and black gains the opposition. Well, guess what? This little pawn you've left back here, you can make a little free move with him, 1 square or 2 squares, it doesn't matter. Now it's black's turn, and you can gain ground. King f7, king d7, king f8, king d7, you'll gain ground. Many players mess these pawn endings up. Make a mistake. So even if you're a pretty good player, I wouldn't resign when you're playing the king. I always force my opponent to beat me in this position because so many people, especially in a blitz game or a bullet chess game, or even say a 15-minute rapid game, will make a mistake here. So force them to beat you. And of course, once they get the queen, show them a little respect and resign at that point. But hey, you know what? They could mess up. And I've seen it happen. All right, I'm out.